Hi everyone, this is an intro to today's story time. As last week, I want to put a warning to parents out there that Hocus Pocus is a little bit witchy, a little bit in an age range of 10 and older in children. So I just want to put a warning out there and to be advised that Hocus Pocus, if you have let your children see the Disney's Hocus Pocus, it is exactly the same as reading the book. And it is, like I said, I just want to put the warning out there that there are witches, there are children dying or in a way, and there are different things that may be elements that you may not be comfortable of letting your children read or hear. So if you have that fear, you can skip this month's story times. But like I said, it's a fun story. And it's all make-believe and it's all out of fun for Halloween. So if you'd like to continue, we will enjoy reading to you Hocus Pocus. And we will begin shortly. Hi, and welcome to Storytime with Jocelyn. It's part 2 of reading Hocus Pocus. And today we're going to read another 4 chapters of Hocus Pocus. I hope you're really enjoying these story times. So this will be the last chapter book we read this year. We're going to do some small, nice holiday books for the next 2 months in November and December. So let us begin with the next 4 chapters of Hocus Pocus. Now, if you'll remember, the last time we read, we left Max and Danny on the street. And she just made up with her brother after he kind of was a little upset with her. And then she got a little upset with him after the trick-or-treating. So here we go. And the chapter is called Yabos. Yabos. Check out this house, Jocelyn. Max giggled the building, which was at least 2 stories tall, though light glowed warm through a series of windows in the roof, as well, suggesting a finished attic. The house itself was made of white clapboard with dark shutters framing each window. Candlelit jack-o'-lanterns praised and poised behind thick window panes, and lining the red brick wall peered at them. The sounds of a pretty spilled down the front steps and through the iron gate to where Max and Danny stood, looking like Drumstick Street urchins. Max felt a pang of envy, but Danny interrupted before he could truly wallow. Rich people, she said matter-of-factly, shrugging. They'll probably make us drink cider and bob for apples. Max looked down at her, wondering how a girl her age could be so good at keeping things in perspective. Despite her prediction, she dashed up the steps and pushed open the door. Max joined her, taking in the party. The entry hall was bigger than his and Danny's new bedrooms combined, with the staircase swiping up one side. In the adjoining room, adults his parents' age milled around, sipping wine. They were all dressed in frilly, expensive-looking clothes that reminded Max of Marie Antoinette. In a far corner, a pianist and string quartet played discreetly. "Is this for real?" Max breathed. "Jackpot!" Danny had honed in on the cauldron of candy on the table in the middle of the entryway. They dashed over to it together, and Max plunged both hands in, feeling a giddiness he hadn't experienced since he was close to Danny's age. The cauldron was almost overflowing with full-size 100 grands, or O. Henry bars, plus gobstoppers, Butterfinger BBs, and chocolate lollipops shaped like witches, and Frankenstein's monster. Danny picked up a witch wrapped in a cellophane and ran a finger over the warty nose reverentially as if she could get a sugar high just from touching it. "Max Dennison." The girl's voice sounded like she caught a toddler with his hand in the cookie jar. Or is this case the candy cauldron? Max looked up to find Allison on the second floor landing, leaning over the wooden handrail. Like the other women downstairs, she wore a long silk dress with lots of trim and complicated buttons. The cream sleeves of the dress ended at her elbows and turned into a waterfall of white lace. She wore an expensive-looking necklace, too, made of fat white pearls, and one of those medallions with the Victorian women's profile carved into it. That's a cameo. The dress didn't seem like Allison's style, but the smile on her face, big and broad and a big sly, was all her, and it made Max's heart do a complicated flip. Allison? He said, stepping away from the candy conjuring. Oh, Danny said conspiratively. Her eyes dotted from her brother to the girl at the top of the staircase. Allison! Max shot her a dead look. Allison grabbed her flouncy skirts to prevent herself from tripping down the steps. I thought you weren't into Halloween, she said, making her way toward them. I'm not, said Max. I'm just taking my sister Danny around. That's so nice, said Allison, smiling. Max's stomach turned into a warm, melty mess. He'd never made Allison smile like that before. Not like she wasn't being polite, but like she was actually impressed. He grinned back and put an arm around Danny's shoulders. I always do it, he said proudly. My parents made him, said Danny smartly. Max nudged her. Jocelyn, Allison's smile grew bigger as she watched the two siblings tease each other. Do you guys want some cider? Sure, said Max before Danny could protest. He shot her a warning look when Allison's back was turned as she headed into the adjoining room, but Danny only smirked at him. Allison filled 2 orange paper cups with warm cider and returned to them. Thanks, said Max, taking the cup she offered him. How's the party? Boring, said Allison. It's just a bunch of my parents' friends. They do this every year. She walked back over to the cauldron and gestured. And I get candy duty. By the way, Danny, I love your costume. Thank you, said Danny. I really like yours too. Of course, I couldn't wear anything like that because I don't have... She paused, turned innocently to her brother. What do you call them, Max? Yabos? Max choked on his cider. The sting of cinnamon and powdered cloves went up in his nose. Max likes your yabos, Danny said. In fact, he loves them. Max looked apologetically at Allison, trying to convey both abject horror and kids will be kids, but probably just managing to look like a stalker. Allison laughed and picked out a few more pieces of candy for Danny. Max, meanwhile, wondered how he could possibly redeem himself, or at least explain himself. He also wondered whether his parents would mind if Danny mysteriously went missing and ended up living with their aunt in Seattle. I'm really into witches, said Allison, admiring Danny's costume. Max was too relieved by the change in topic to be annoyed that they were again talking about witches as if they were baseball cards or Bon Jovi. Really? Me too. Danny unwrapped her chocolate witch and nibbled on the tip of her hat. We just learned about those sisters in school. You mean the Sanderson Sisters? A look of real excitement came over Allison's face, the way it did when Miss Olin started talking about the Bill of Rights and U.S. history. I know all about them, she went on. My mom used to run the museum. Danny grinned, equally excited. There's a museum about them? Yeah, but they shut it down because... Allison leaned in and lowered her voice to a whisper. A lot of spooky things happened there. Max felt like this plan had boomeranged and fallen in his lap, and he wasn't about to let it slip away again. Why don't we go to the old Sanderson house? He asked. He hoped he sounded fearless and cool, especially since his attempts to impress her up till then had come off more like a schoolyard teasing. Allison turned to him, startled. Danny shook her head, looking frightened, which confused Max because she seemed so excited just 6 seconds before. Well, come on, he said to Allison. Make a believer out of me. Allison met his eyes, and he couldn't stop himself from smiling. He was surprised when she smiled back. Okay, she said, smoothing her skirts. Let me get change. They'll never miss me. When Allison was on her way up the stairs, Danny turned to Max. We're not going up there, she insisted. My friends at school told me all about that place. It's weird. Danny, he touched her wrist, but his eyes didn't leave Allison. This is the girl of my dreams. So take her to the movies like a normal person, Danny insisted. Danny! Once Allison had rounded a corner at the top of the stairs, Max signed and sank down onto one knee, facing his sister. Look, just do this one thing for me and I'll do anything you say. Please, he pleaded. Danny looked thoughtful. Max didn't know why Allison was giving him the time of day now after blowing him off only a few hours before, but he suspected it had something to do with Danny. He wasn't going to let the second chance or his little sister get away from him. Please, he begged, clasping her hands. Please! Danny patted his shoulder to quiet him. Okay, next year we go trick-or-treating as Wendy and Peter Pan. She leaned in close, her nose almost touching his. With tights, or it's no deal. Max looked longingly at the empty staircase. Danny shrugged and spun away. Okay, he said, grabbing her around the middle before she got too far. Like it or not, Allison seemed more relaxed when Danny was around. And like it or not, he felt more relaxed too. Was that weird? He didn't have time to psychoanalyze. Deal, he said. Deal. Danny beamed and slapped his back. On to chapter 6. It's just a bunch of hocus pocus. Allison led the way, though Max knew exactly where they were going to. She cut through the graveyard, which made Max nervous. They might come across Jay and Ernie again. The last thing he needed was to be forced into a fight to defend Allison's honor on his own. The graveyard was eerie at night. It seemed less like a place to watch Salem Harbor and more like a place to perform weird occult rituals. The tombstones resembled crooked teeth, and the linen trees towered like gaunt and broken bone skeletons watching them in the dark. Danny clutched Max's forearm the whole time, and though her nails were clipped too short to dig into Max's skin, he could feel the press of her fingertips through his jacket. It almost made him feel bad about the whole thing. But he reasoned that she'd go to school the next week with the best story in her class. Really, he was doing her a favor. They exited the graveyard, and Allison led them all the way down the street to the corner with the stop sign. She took Danny's right hand in hers, and Danny still clung tight to Max's wrist, and a fluttering feeling stirred in his belly. It was almost like he was holding Allison's hand. He'd never thought about whether or not she'd get along with Danny, but he liked that she did, and he liked that she tried. And he liked that she took him to the crosswalk to teach Danny good road etiquette. A stone wall bordered the sidewalk. It was made of big river tumbled rocks stuck together with crumbling mortar and sticked even more securely with creeping ivy. Legend has it that the bones of 100 children are buried within these walls, said Allison, running her fingers along the time-polished stones. Oh, great. Allison let go of Danny's hand as they approached a wrought iron gate. You ready? she asked, looking from Danny to Max. Max nodded, pressing Danny against his hip in case she tried to book it. Tights, she muttered, meeting his eyes. He nodded. Allison looked at them both like they were on something, but she pulled an old key out of her sweater and unlocked the gate. The three of them stepped through it, and something small and dark shot across the path in front of them. Danny jumped, short or not. This time Max felt the bite of her nails. What was that? She hissed. Max dragged her forward, taking her torso with him, as if her feet were rooted to the ground. It's just a cat, he said, then knelt and pointed at a fallen tree to show her. Two yellowed green eyes caught the sight and light of the distant street lamp. It's not just a cat, said Allison. It's the cat. The one that warned you not to go in. It's been here as long as I can remember. How long do cats live? Danny whispered urgently. Max felt around in the fallen leaves and picked up a pebble. He chucked it toward the glowing eyes, prompting a yowl. I know, that was mean. The cat disappeared. Danny and Allison both looked at Max, disgusted. I didn't think I'd hit it, he said. Danny sighed and looked at Allison. Max failed out of baseball camp, she said, sounding resigned. They started up the buckling path. I did not fail, said Max. Fine. Max came home crying from baseball camp. That was a long time ago. How do you even remember? My blackmail book, said Danny. The rockway petered out long before they reached the house, and the three of them were forced to tromp through a thick carpet of dead leaves. Max stepped down onto a speedily falling tree, applying all his weight to make it easier for the girls to pass. Allison steadied herself on her shoulder as she did, which made Max swallow hard. The house ahead of them was smaller than Max expected, but somehow it seemed to loom above them, as if its spirit were far bigger than the collapsing wooden porch and broken heaves. Max eyed it, feeling uncertain. He knew he was the one who suggested this field trip, and he was beginning to think the place would cave in on them, or at least give them all tennis. The low wooden steps creaked as Max climbed them. I don't think we should go in, said Danny. Max gave her a look and she rolled her eyes. Sure, she said, whatever. Allison produced a second key and unlocked the door. The sound of the deadbolt disengaging was loud and final. Max looked back at Danny, who was chewing her bottom lip as if she was debating whether to walk home by herself. Finally, she sighed and trembled up the stairs. She muttered something about stupid crushes as she flipped a switch on her plastic candy bucket and lifted the jack-o'-lantern's glowing face. She led the way into the house, following by Max and Allison. I can't see a thing, Danny said. There's a light switch around here somewhere, said Allison. I know, Jocelyn. Max took Danny's makeshift flashlight and peered around. When Max had biked past the previous weekend, he thought the house seemed creepy in an old, dilapidated way, but now he realized that it was sinister in a far different manner. The air inside was both stale and a little too still. The way a house feels when everyone is playing hide and seek, still yet tingling with nerves, still yet anxiously watching. A ticket counter at the front of the room displayed dusty tickle clocks, and including a postcard of Salem and a stuffed bear with patterned capes and tiny brooms, and found a ladder, Max said, plucking a Zippo from the display case. He's got a lighter. The silver lighter was engraved with a witch silhouette against a full moon. He struck it and hurried over to the wall to help Allison locate the light switch. It was an industrial thing that had only been installed in the past decade or so, but when they flipped the switch, it didn't work. "Try the breaker box," said Allison, pointing. Max opened the metal panel and turned every breaker off and then on again. This time, the lights throughout the room popped to life. The main part of the house was one big room with wood floors and wood walls and a high wood ceiling. There was a loft on one side of the house, which reminded Max of the small loft in his own room. A broom was mounted near the loft, with a handful plaque identifying it as a witch's broom, in case visitors weren't sure about the house's trick. There were other signs of a modern influence, too. In addition to the electric lights, narrow piping ran around the perimeter of the ceiling, each branch ending with a spigot. Sprinklers in case the old tinker box went up in flames, Max realized. Also, the layout of the room was that of a museum, not everyday living. The furniture had been moved back from the middle of the room to make way for a series of displays that had become overrun with spider webs in the absence of regular cleaning. On one wall was a huge curio cabinet loaded with bottles and jars. Nearby, a set of cast iron pots and pans hung from hooks in the ceiling. Everything had a small plaque with a grangling and obvious explanation. "Here's the original cauldron," Allison said, pointing to the squat iron pot hung above an empty circle of stones. "Upstairs is where they slept," she said, gesturing to the loft. She came around to a display case featuring a large leather-bound book. It was the biggest book Max had ever seen, as long as his forearm and thicker than the width of his hand. The cover was held together with a wide, angry-looking stitches, and the swirls of tarnished silver helped reinforce the corners and the spine. Along the right edge of the cover was a strange pucker of leather, almost like the closed eye of a rhinoceros, or of a person who spent far too much time in a tanning booth. A lop of silver surrounded that too, the far edge of the metal turning into a latch that would keep the book shut if there had been a padlock. Allison leaned down to read the information card. "It was given to her by the devil himself, Jocelyn. The book is bound in human skin and contains the recipes for her most powerful and evil spells." She snuck a glance at Max's sister. "I get the picture," Danny said. Allison laughed. "According to town records, this went missing after the Sanderson sisters were hanged. They found it in another woman's house just a few days later. I guess she wanted to try it out for herself." Danny shuddered. "How many witches does Salem have anyway?" "None anymore," Allison said, squeezing Danny's shoulder. "Present company excluded," she added, and tugged on the tip of Danny's hat. The little girl smiled. "What's that?" Max asked. He crossed to the far corner of the room where an ancient-looking cast-iron stand supported a tall cream-colored candle. Its surface was decorated with the complicated etchings of trees and fire, and at the base, small humans running in fear. But they had nowhere to run since they always ran into one another. "Oh," Allison pitched her voice low. "It's the black flame candle." Max looked at the nearby plaque. "Black flame candle, made from the fat of a hanged man. Legend says that on a full moon, it will raise the spirits of the dead if lit by a virgin on Halloween night." It looked around the quiet old museum. There was no one there but them, and this seemed like the perfect way to make their night more memorable. It would give Danny something else to tell her friends, and Allison too. He liked the idea of Allison telling her friends about him, even if it was about him doing something silly. "So let's light this sucker and meet the old broads," he said, pulling the lighter out of his pocket. Danny, looking aghast, shot her head vehemently. "Want to do the honors?" Max asked Allison. She was smiling but looked unimpressed. "No, thanks," she said, rolling her eyes. It was the eye roll that threw him. Did that mean she wasn't a virgin? Did he care? Out of nowhere, a screeching cat leaped onto the back of his neck. Its claws were sharp needles, and there were so damn many of them, Max fell to his knees, shouting. He wrestled it off and dropped hard onto his shoulder. He started creature sluck under an old chest of drawers. "Stupid cat!" "Okay, Max," said Danny. "You've had your fun. It's time to go. Come on, Allison." She took Allison by the hand, and the two of them headed for the door. "Max, she's right," said Allison. "Let's go." But Max had finally caught his breath. "Oh, come on," he said. Not ready to head home, not just yet. He liked Allison, sure, but she was also the only person who'd given him the time of day in Salem, and he couldn't make it another 2 years there if he didn't have any friends. It's just a bunch of hocus pocus. That meant Danny put on her mom voice. "Max, I'm not kidding this time," she said. "It's time to go." Max shook his head at what little kid Danny was being. Sometimes she acted so mature that he forgot until moments like these that she was only 8. He opened the Zippo and held it to the candle's dusky wax. "Max, no!" shouted Danny. The candle caught instantly, and Max grinned. But then he saw what a strange flame it was. It flickered yellow and orange and around the edges, but had a cool black heart. Max's expression changed to one of concern. Uh-oh. The burning rain of death. One by one, the light bulbs around the room burst in flashes of brilliant white. Each time, Danny squealed, her hands covering her eyes. Allison let a quiet, frightened sound as the last bulb shattered and left them in the dark. A breeze picked up, tumbling Danny's hat from her head. She uncovered her eyes and looked up amazed. The heavy ironwork chandelier creaked loudly on its chain. Allison pulled Danny closer to her as Max began to cross the room towards the two girls. A brilliant green light shot through the gaps in the floorboards, and the wood began to tremble and jump, threatening to rip away the nails, keeping in its place. Alice and Danny screamed, jumped toward the nearest wall. Ah! Max tried to steady himself by grabbing onto some nearby furniture, but it felt like the whole house was shaking, and like the floor could very well decide to open up and drop them all into one somewhat unknown world, Jocelyn. Max was deciding whether to attempt a running leap at the door when the house stilled and went dark again. The three stood quiet for a moment as if they were sure whether it would start all over again. "What happened?" Max finally asked, breathless. Danny picked up her witch's hat and shoved it back onto her head. "A virgin lit the candle," she said. There was a sharp pop, and one by one the lights in the chandelier relit, this time with real flames. Around the room, candles came alive with a soft whoosh. Beneath the huge cauldron, an equally large fire roared to life, and the kitchen hearth fizzed as if someone had thrown in a handful of lit sparklers. The sparks quickly caught the display tinder and burst into a warm fire. The air cracked open with a delighted crackle, and Allison and Danny dove away from the front door just as if blown open, its knob slamming into the wall. Excuse me. Max had hidden as well, ducking under a heavy dining table near the spoiled books case. When he lowered himself into the ground and looked up at the door, his eyes grew wide. 3 women were silhouetted in milky moonlight and framed by the open door, the first with long blonde hair and a narrow waist, the second with 2 wild swoops of hair near the crown of her head, and the third with dark whirly curls twisted into a shape of a crooked cornucopia. The woman in the middle marched into the house. She wore a full-length emerald dress with a high collar and a creeping black pattern that seemed determined to smother the green. A gold clasp clenched to the dress at her waist, and her underskirts were a brilliant blue. As she came into the light, the unnatural red of her hair became obvious. "We're home," she declared. Max felt dizzy. This can't be happening, he thought. This can't be real. He glanced in Allison's direction, but she was out of his line of sight. Was it a prank? A weird Salem Central way of getting back at him after he made fun of Halloween? But he recalled the way the black flame candle burned. Beside the woman in green, the other 2 women clasped hands and began to dance and jump about, giggling. One, the blonde one, wore a low-cut, rosy dress with filmy sleeves that gathered at her waists. The others wore layers and layers, an orange dress beneath a red vest and a matching wool cape. Her tartan skirts were intersecting lines of black and gray, and depending on the light, a dozen other colors. "Oh, sweet revenge," said the red-headed witch. "You see, sisters? My curse worked perfectly." "That's because thou art perfect, Winnie," said the brunette, touching her elder sister's shoulder. She means Winifred, thought Max, remembering Miss Olin's story. Winifred Sanderson. The 3 witches laughed. And Winifred hurried around the room, her brunette sister trailing her. The blonde witch waited until they're gone, then popped up onto her toes and reached into the rafters over the door. She was tall and thin, and her hair flowed in gentle waves down her back and over the creamy skin of her chest. Right, Jocelyn? She grinned as she found the thing she'd been feeling around for. She pulled down what appeared to be a length of twine. "My lucky rabbit tail!" "Rat tail," she crowned. "Just where I left it." "But who lit the black flame candle, Winifred asked, crossing toward the strange flame. She paused, fingers on her lips, then noticed the case with a huge spell book. She gave a delighted gasp and hurried over to it, tapping her long nails on the glass. "Come on, sleepyhead," she cooed. "We have work to do. I've missed you. Did you miss me too?" The brunette sister sidled up behind her. "Winnie," she whispered. "Yes, Mary?" "I smell children." "Sick 'em!" The 3 witches slipped into line, when Mary leading. She sniffed the air eagerly. "It's a little girl," she declared. Behind her, the blonde Sanderson nibbled the tip of her rat tail. Max knew that they were headed right for Danny, but he didn't know what to do. He spotted her crouched behind the old ticket-taking counter and chewing her bottom lip. He gouged the distance between himself and Mary, wondering how long he could keep the sisters occupied if he left out of hiding. 7, Mary said, sniffing again. "Maybe 8.5. "Let's play with her," trilled the blonde. "You'll frighten her, Sarah," said Winifred. Sarah began to sing softly. "Come out, little children, I'll take thee away." Danny raised her eyes to the ceiling, pleading with some higher power to help her. And Winifred closed a hand over Sarah's mouth. "Come out, dear," she said. "We'll not harm thee." "We love children," Mary agreed, slamming a hand on the counter. Winifred gave her an ugly look, but it was quickly wiped away when Danny popped up in front of them. I thought thou never come, sisters, she said, adopting the worst British accent Matt had ever heard. Max. Greetings, little one, Winifred said warmly. Thou's I who brought you back. Imagine, said Winifred, such a pretty little... She swallowed thickery. Child, Sarah giggled. And she's so well fed, isn't she? Said Mary, going around the counter and the counter. Plump, she explained, poking Danny in the ribs. Danny shrieked, plump! Another jab, another squeal. Plump! Shisky baby! Winifred rescued Danny just as Max was about to barrel across the room. Tell me, dumpling, she said, placing Danny's hand on her arm as she led her deeper into the house. What is the year? 1993? Winifred pushed Danny into an ancient, straight-back dining chair. Sisters, she said eagerly, we have been gone 300 years. Well, Winnie, how time flies, huh? Said Mary. When you're dead? The sisters all laughed. And Danny laughed too, clearly hoping to please them. She kept going after they had finished, until her eyes landed on Mary's hungry face. Then her laughter died into a nervous chuckle. It's been great fun, she said, getting up, but I guess I'd better be going. Oh, Winifred said, pressing her back into the chair. Stay for supper. But I'm not hungry, said Danny. But we are, said Mary with a dangerous smile. This time when Danny tried to get up, Mary and Sarah each caught her by an arm and lifted her, kicking and screaming toward the cauldron at the heart of the room. Hey, shouted Max, springing out of his hiding place. Let go of my little sister. Roast him, Winnie, Mary growled. No, Sarah breathed, touching Winifred's arm eagerly. Let me play with him. Winifred heeded Mary rather than Sarah and shot a bolt of bright, branching lightning at Max's chest. He lost consciousness briefly as he hit the ground, but woke to a pain snaking through his whole body. He groaned. Max! Screamed Danny. Winifred threw her magic at him again, dragging him across the floor and pinning him to the wall. I haven't lost my touch, sisters, she said, crackling. See? She flung him about to face her. Max gasped at the feeling of knives in his bloodstream. The pain was sharp and sudden and made him think that his heart would give out. He tried to cover his chest, but his hands were pressed against the wall by an invisible force. Sarah nested into his neck. She smelled like wet earth and orange pomanders and honey. Hello, Winifred said to him. Goodbye. This time her green lightning bolts lifted him from the ground. His body skimmed the wall, moving slowly to the ceiling. He couldn't see straight, could hardly keep enough wits about him to continue to breathe. I know, Jocelyn, he whimpered, but the sound was drowned out by the electric crackle and hum. Mary held Danny tightly as the little girl shrieked her brother's name over and over again. Mary, Allison said as soon as the witch turned. She struck her over the head with a broom she'd retrieved from the wall display. As the bonnet witch stumbled around, Allison grabbed a frying pan from the rack and slammed it over her head, making her hair even more crooked. You leave my brother alone, Danny shouted at Winifred, then struck her with her bag of candy. She lashed out at Sarah as well as for good measure. Max crumpled to the ground, weak and exhausted. When Danny crouched down to tend to him, the black cat reappeared and leaped onto Winifred's neck. It flexed its claws into the softest parts. Get him! Winifred shrieked, spinning about. Get this animal! Get this beast off of me! Max, let's go! Danny said, pulling at his jacket. He forced himself up and stumbled after her toward the door, where Allison waited for them. He was about to join them when he realized they couldn't just leave the Sanderson sisters inside. They'd find their way to town eventually, and he didn't want that horrible lightning magic let loose on anyone else. The witches still snuggled and struggled to get the cat off of Winifred, who spun widely about. "Get out!" he shouted at the two girls. "Go, go, go!" The witches finally flung the cat off of Winifred. Max stopped short before reaching the door. How do you kill a witch, he thought. In The Wizard of Oz, Dorothy did it with a bucket of water, but he didn't have a bucket. Then he remembered the sprinklers. When he was sure the girls were gone, he hoisted himself into the sleeping loft and rose on unsteady feet. "Hey!" he called, drawing the witch's attention up. "You have messed with the great and powerful Max, and now must suffer the consequences. I summon the burning rain of death." The sisters tried to puzzle out what he had meant, talking over one another. "Burning what?" asked Sarah. "Burning rain of death," repeated Winifred. "What does he mean by rain, did he say?" asked Mary. "I don't know. Burning." Max drew out a lighter again and snapped it. When the flame popped up, the Sanderson sisters gasped. "He mixed fire in his hand!" mattered Winifred, impressed. Max lifted the lighter toward a spigot on the sprinkler system and waited until they all began sprouting water throughout the house. The Sanderson sisters screamed, "Ah!" rushing away to try to escape the falling water. Max leaped down from the loft but slipped in a puddle, falling hard on his back. The cat jumped onto his chest. "Nice job, Max!" Max gasped, recalling. "You can talk?" "Yeah, no kidding," said the cat. "Now get the spell book!" Max couldn't move, but wasn't sure whether that was from shock or a broken spine. The cat battled a paw at Max's face. "Come on!" he ordered. "Move it!" With that, Max shoved himself to his feet and grabbed one of the posts that held on information card for the witch's cauldron. He used it to shutter the glass to the spellbook's case and pulled it out, ignoring the shrouds of glass that dug into his skin. The witches were too afraid of the water to chase him, instead cowering in an alcove near the kitchen. "My book!" cried Winifred. "He's going for my book!" Mac dashed to the door and down from the front steps, the spellbook clutched to his chest. He could hear Allison calling to him, and he followed her voice toward the street and through the property's front gate. Inside the house, Mary and Sarah wailed. "I'm dying," Sarah cried, her blonde hair and red dress soaking and dripping. "I'm too pretty to die." As yet, they weren't dying. Winifred drew a palmful of water to her mouth and tasted it. "Winnie!" shrieked Mary in warning. "Shut up!" Winifred spat back. "It is but water." Mary tasted a few drops for herself. "Most refreshing," she quipped. Sarah extended her tongue. "It is," she said, then tried to swallow as much as she could. "You idiot!" Winifred said to Mary. "The boy has tricked us, and he's stolen the book. After him!" Before they left, Winifred rescued the black frame candle, stuck it in the tall kitchen cupboard, safely away from the strange metal clouds in the ceiling that spilled rain all over the mother's furniture and carpet. Then the Sanderson sisters ran through the old wood, as they had not done in 300 years. They arrived at the front gate, and the three of them stopped, elbow to elbow. "'Tis a black river," said Mary. "Perhaps it is not too deep," said Sarah. Winifred grabbed her roughly by the arm and flung her ahead of them. Sarah shrieked, leaping, but when her heels touched the ground, they didn't fall through. "'Tis firm," she explained, gathering her skirts and doing a skipping dance on the asphalt. "'Tis firm as stone." "Why, it's a road," said Winifred, joining her sister. Mary took a few careful steps to join them. "Sisters," said Winifred, drawing attention back to herself as usual. "My book!" They began to walk down the road together, but were interrupted by the keen of fire trucks and ambulances. Red and white lights flashed through the sky, lighting up the witches' faces. The sisters screamed in fear and turned, desperate for the comfort of the wood. Ah! Otherwise, it's curtains. Max, Allison, and Danny took a long way through the wood that the cat seemed to know by heart. It led them weaving through trees, twitching over and under fallen branches and the leaning columns of half-rotted trunks. In the distance, Max could hear the eerie whine of emergency vehicles, no doubt called by the sprinklers going off on what was still considered public property. The group, still led by the cat, emerged at the edge of the road. He leaped off the curb without even looking, and Allison and Danny followed him without having to be asked. "Whoa, whoa, whoa," Max said, pulling up short. "This is the graveyard." "Yes, it's the graveyard," said the cat, as if Max were one of the most annoying people he'd ever met. And perhaps he was. "Witches can't step foot here." Max looked at the girls and waved a defeated hand at the cat. "He talks," he said. "At least he's not trying to electrocute us," said Danny, which Max thought was a fair point. "Is this a Halloween thing?" asked Allison. "Did the Sandersons cast a spell on you?" The cat slipped through the gate without deigning to answer. "Follow me," he called. "Over here." He paused, waiting for Allison to pry open the gate. She did, and they filed through and into the abandoned graveyard. Max was careful to shut the gate after them. If there had been a lock, he would have bolted the thing and taken the key with him. "I want to show you something," explained the cat, "to give you an idea of exactly what we're dealing with." They dreaded through the quiet trees of the graveyard. The tombstones weren't arranged in careful rows, as they were in most graveyards Max had seen. Instead, they appeared in clusters or alone in unexpected places. Some of the parts of the graveyard even looked more like a park, with benches and fountains and the occasional mausoleum. They walked for what seemed a long time, until they arrived in a clearing. They stopped at a tombstone near the edge of the woods. "William Buckerson?" Max read, crouching near it. "Billy Butcherson was Winnie's lover," said the cat. "But she found him sporting with her sister Sarah, so she poisoned him and sewed his mouth shut with a dull piece of needle so he couldn't tell her secrets even in death. Winifred always was the jealous type." Allison looked at the cat in wonder. "You're Thackeray Binks," she said. "Yes. So the legends are true," she added. He paused, perhaps unsure how to respond. "Well, follow me," he finally said, leading them deeper into the graveyard. "I want to show you something else." "Teenagers again," grumbled one of the men who had arrived in the nosy red vehicle. A stream of such men had rushed into the Sanderson house, and now they were filing out in a more orderly fashion. "Every year they break into that house and do something stupid," agreed the man walking back to the street with him. Water dripped from his helmet. The captain had made him climb up and fiddled with the sprinkler system when they found the house empty. "I hate Halloween," said the first man. Sarah, crunched in the Beer Betty bushes next to her sisters, bit her bottom lip as the two men walked by. She'd never been acquainted with a man who looked quite so dashing in suspenders and oversized trousers. She stretched her neck, risking being spotted, to keep the gentleman in line of sight a little longer. Who are they?" stuttered Mary, ducking further into the bushes as she could balance out her sister's doing. "Boys," said Sarah wistfully. "Perhaps they are keepers of Master's red vessel," Mary asked hopefully, eyeing the vehicle at the bottom of the road. A contraption near the top threw off red and white sparks. His demon divers? They are witch hunters, corrected Winifred, sounding disgusted. Observe, she added. They wear black robes and carry axes to chop the wood to burn us. Mary made a frightening sound. Hold me, she asked, smuggled her red-haired sister. Winifred battered her away. Sarah, meanwhile, was whacking on a spider she discovered on a nearby vine. Sisters, hissed Winifred, let me make one thing perfectly clear. The fiery vehicle had refilled with the witches' hunters and tore away. The magic that brought us back only works tonight, on All Hallows' Eve, said Winifred, getting to her feet and brushing off her skirts. When the sun comes up, we're dust. Dust? Asked Mary. Toast! Toast? Winifred turned to her two sisters. Pudding! She shouted, thumbing up her hands. Mary shrieked, and Sarah shuddered, then leaned toward Mary and whispered, Do we like pudding? Fortunately, said Winifred, looking off into the moonlit woods, the potion I brewed the night we had hanged would keep us alive and young forever. Sarah beamed and hopped excitingly. Unfortunately, thrilled Winifred, turning on her heel and pushing past her sisters toward the sagging porch. The recipe for that potion is in my spell book, and the little witches have stolen it. Therefore, it stands to reason, does it not, sisters dear, that we must find the book, brew the potion, and suck the lives out of the children of Salem before sunrise? Otherwise, it's curtains. We evaporate. We cease to exist. She gave each of them an accusing look. Does thou comprehend? Well, you explained it beautifully, Winnie, Mary rushed to say. The way you sort of startled out with the adventure part, and then you sort of slowly went into the... Explained what? Asked Sarah. Winifred pursed her lips and then seemed to make up her mind. Come, she shouted, shoving open the door of the house. We fly! Eventually, Binks took Max, Allison, and Danny to a small gravestone whose inscription was nearby and visible in the low light of the full moon. Max knelt to get a better look, running the tips of his fingers over letters and numerals time had satted down. The gravestone marked the burial of a beloved daughter and sister who had died on October 31st, 1693. The name read, Emily Binks. Because of me, my little sister's life was stolen, said Binks, studying the grave marker. Max sat down, wrapped his arm around his knees. He could hear the wistfulness in Binks's voice. Max had never seen a cat look sad before, but Binks's expression was unmistakable. I know, Jocelyn. Even with a muzzle and whiskers, Danny knelt down across from Max, and Allison perched on a weather-worn rock between the two of them, Winifred's spell book tucked safely in her lap. For years, said Binks, I waited for my life to end so I could reunite with my family, but Winifred's curse kept me alive. Then one day I figured out what to do with my eternal life. I failed Emily, but I wouldn't fail again. When the three sisters returned, I'd be there to stop them. So for 3 centuries, I guarded their house on All Hallows Night, when I knew some airhead virgin might light that candle. Nice going, airhead, said Danny to her brother. Hey, look, I'm sorry, okay? Said Max, getting to his feet. He paused, then said hopefully, we're talking about 3 ancient hags versus the 20th century. How bad can it be? Bad, said Binks. Allison drew back the cover of Winifred's heavy spell book. Stay out of there, shouted Binks. Startled, Allison slammed it shut. Why? She asked, looking up. It holds Winifred's most dangerous spells, said Binks. She must not get it. Max grabbed the book from Allison and tossed it on the ground. Let's torch the sucker, he said, striking the silver lighter. He held it in the page of the book, but the flame reared back as if the force fell in scorn to the thing. It's protected by magic, said Binks. The sound of crackling broke the air, and the group turned. The three Sanderson sisters hovered above them, each perched on a wood-handled broom. Sarah on the left wore a rich purple robe and a tight bodice, the color that pressed wide grapes. Mary on the right was dressed in dwindling clothes, but they were the crimson of blood drops on snow. And Winifred in the middle wore forest green trimmed in faded gold. It's just a bunch of hocus pocus, Winifred quipped. Mary, Sarah, she said, gesturing at her sisters. They veered off on their brooms in either direction. Sarah went straight for Max. Brave little virgin who lit the candle, she crooned. I'll be thy friend. Allison snatched up a dead branch and banished it at the witch. Hey, she yelled, take a hike. The dried end scraped at Sarah's skin and cloak, and she winced and cried out, peeling away. Winifred smiled at her book, still in the ground where Max had left it. Book, she called to it. The thing lifted off the ground and began to float toward her. Come on, Mummy. Binks leaped on top of it, and both he and the book clumped back to earth. Fray not, he called. Thackeray Binks, thou mangy feline, Winifred said, sounding almost impressed. Still alive? And waiting for you, said Binks. Ah, thou hast waited in vain, and thou wilt fail to save thy friends, just as thou failed to save thy sister. She pointed the end of the broom at him and Dove. Grab the book, shouted Binks. Allison nabbed it, and the group belted away from Winifred. They ran for the protection of the trees, but Mary cut them off, grinning as she bowed down on them. They dodged her, and she sailed past, no doubt circling to Recesses. Max pulled Danny close to him, sheltering her with one arm. They can't touch us here, right? He asked Binks. Well, said the cat, they can't. Danny turned to him. I don't like the way you said that. The Sanderson sisters, still perched on their brooms, reappeared out of the woods. Sarah licked her strawberry-colored lips. Winifred grinned widely and guided her broom closer to the three friends. Max realized they'd returned to where they started, the grave of Billy Butcherson. Unfaithful lover long since dead, Winifred incanted, gesturing with unnaturally long, knotted fingers. Deep asleep in thy woolly, wormy bed. Allison clutched at Max's arms. He wrapped other arm tighter around Danny. His small fingers dug into his skin through his jacket. Wiggle thy toes, chanted Winifred. Open thy eyes. Twist thy fingers toward the sky. Life is sweet. Be not shy. On thy feet, so saith I. The ground began to tremble, and the earth over the nearby grave split, soil flying up as if it were boiling water. A coffin shivered out of the cut in the ground. Max! Danny whimpered. Max! He pulled her away from the grave. His pulse pounded in his ears, and his whole body went slick with sweat. Oh my gosh, Jocelyn. The coffin burst open, the lid, and a corpse dragged its way out. He grunted, shaked earth from his muttered hair. That's when he spotted Max, Allison, and Danny, who were watching him with horror. Billy Butcherson jumped, startled by their presence. The kids screamed, ah, and rushed away. Billy looked around, confused, and spotted the gravestone behind him. He sighed. Hello, Billy, Sarah said, waving. He smiled through the stitches, keeping his lips sealed tightly shut. Catch those children, shouted Winifred. Get up! Get up! Get out of that ditch! Billy pushed himself out of the broken bits of his final resting place. Faster! Binks led his human companions through the woods, ducking under fallen branches and weaving between famous and various tombstones and mausoleums. In here, Binks said, stopping near what looked like a storm drain. Allison helped Danny slip through first and then jumped in herself. Max spotted Billy Butcherson scrambling through the woods and grabbing a nearby branch, dragging it back as far as he could. When Billy was close enough, Max released the branch and it flew forward, knocking Billy's head from his shoulders. Max whooped, but the headless body started toward him again and Max hurried into the drain. Jocelyn! Allison helped him to his feet at the bottom. Danny stood nearby, coughing hard. You okay? Allison asked her. Danny grunted. Allison handed the Sanderson spellbook to Max. What is this place, Binks? Max asked, tucking the book under one arm. It's the old Salem crypt, Binks replied. It connects to the sewer and ends up on the street. Charming, Allison said widely. We need to find my parents, said Max. They'll know what to do. Your parents? Asked Binks skeptically. Adults always show up too late. Max is right, said Danny. Mom fixes everything. Binks seemed to think Danny's words more seriously than Max's. He thought about it for a moment, then shrugged. We might as well try, he said. I don't have a better idea. They're at town hall, said Max. Can you take us there? The cat gave him a look as if to say, am I an immortal cat who's been living in the same town for 300 years? Just then, Max noticed a skeleton suspended from the vault's high ceiling. Don't look up, Danny, he said. Don't worry, she replied. Her eyes had been steadily focused on the ground since they arrived. I won't. Relax, Binks told them. I've hunted mice down here for years. Mice? Groaned Danny. Ugh, God. But they had to choose between that and an undead colonist with a mandate to capture them. So rodents it would be. And that is the end of the 4 chapters for part 2 of today's story time. We will see you next week for another 4 chapters of Hocus Pocus. I hope you enjoyed it. And we will see you next week for another story time. Bye-bye.